Welcome to another World of UX podcast. This is your host, Darren Hood. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. A special welcome, as always, to those of you who are joining us for the first time. Again, as mentioned previously, I am extending the celebration of the 4-year anniversary of the podcast by just doing a lot of interviews, just bringing a lot of people on the show. I talk a lot. Yeah, we know that. I mean, when I'm on the show, I do. But I think the voices that are out there, there's a ton of voices in the UX community that need to be heard. A lot of people who have a lot of phenomenal things to share. And we are who we are, not just because of the work we put into things, but we are who we are because of the voices that we lend our ear to. And so I'm huge. I mean, people don't believe that I'm actually shy. They don't believe that, but I am. And I have a very long attention span, and I will listen so long you'll forget I'm in the room if you didn't actually see me sitting there. So I love listening to people who have a lot to contribute. I love using my platform to help people get these voices out there, help people to understand, people who are writing books, people who are doing talks, people who are doing things. There's a lot of under the radar people. And I really love taking under the radar people and vaulting them out there. And when today's guest was recommended to me by Lou Rosenfeld over at Rosenfeld Media, I have to admit, I didn't know who this gentleman was. And I'm going, okay, first I sort of get on myself because I'm very hard on myself. How come I didn't know who this guy was? Well, truth is, and any of you out there who are like me, don't do that to yourself. It's impossible to know everybody. It's impossible. You can travel a lot of circles like I do, and you still just don't know. And I'm shocked a lot of times. Wow, this guy did that. Wow, this guy wrote this thing over here. This guy was responsible for. Are you kidding me? And I didn't know. So, it is what it is. We don't know everybody. We can't know everybody. But consider this the eye-opener situation as I present. And I hope he understands I refer to him as being under the radar, because people, they're going to come to me and they're going to say, hey, I never heard of this guy. I already know they're going to say that. But this guy is a stalwart. I think of him based on what I've learned about him now that I know he's there. And I'm looking at him on screen. Anybody ever tell you look like Patrick Stewart? I just thought about that. But
that's a compliment.
If he breaks out and starts doing that thing, and Patrick Stewart, he's funny too. Everybody knows him from Star Trek, but he does a lot of other stuff, and he's a smart guy. But I'm expecting we're going to hear the same type of things here today. But at any rate, I'm going to give my little intro. That was a pre-intro. I'm going to give my official intro, and then as I always do, I have my guests then come and tell you what they want to tell you about themselves. But the guest that I have today, he's the author of a book called Managing Priorities: How to Create Better Plans and Make Smarter Decisions. This is a thought that is near and dear to my heart because people always ask me, how in the world do you find time to do X? And so the art of prioritizing, the art of time management, this is a really key thing. And our guest is going to get into this. His experiences include, and this is coming from his Amazon. I didn't write this. I'm not going to take credit for this. This is coming from his Amazon bio. He's been a founder, a CEO. He's been an operational leader. He's been a strategy consultant with startups, innovators, and global brands, including, wait for it, Apple, Adobe, PDI/DreamWorks. We know who DreamWorks is. I'm not sure what PDI is, and maybe he'll speak to that, but DreamWorks, we know who if you're a movie buff like I am, you know who DreamWorks is. Google, Hewlett-Packard, Informatica, Ithaca, Microsoft, PayPal. Wow. This guy has been involved with all of these organizations, SGI, Rackspace, Symantec. This is fantastic. The bio says he was an early pioneer in e-commerce and a co-founder of an organization, help me if I get this wrong, Virtual vineyardwine.com. Did I get that right? All right, I got that right because I actually typed over it. I had a typo, so I make sure I didn't mess anything up there. He also was behind the first usable and secure online shopping cart. Man, where has that taken us today? So all that money you spend at Amazon blame our guest. So at any rate, our guest, the one, the only, I'm so happy to have with me on the World of UX podcast today. Folks, welcome Harry Max. Harry, take it away. Tell the people who you are in addition to what I just presented in your bio today.
Well, first, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much, because I have been behind the scenes for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I met Lou because one of my friends said, you have to get out from behind your computer and go meet some people. And that was back, I don't even know when that was. It was a long time ago.
Wow.
And so that's when Lou and I met and we became friends.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a long story of how it is I ended up getting into sort of UX and product design and development. And it all started with, I left college without a degree to drop into the tech world, lived in Santa Cruz at the time, and I'm back there now, and joined a company called the Santa Cruz Operation, SCO, which not a lot of people know about.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the technical documentation world, so online technical documentation. And this is, the internet existed, but the World Wide Web did not exist, right? This was 1987-ish,
wow.
right? That was a long time ago. And when I say I've been behind the scenes, kind of, off the radar, very much just doing stuff like online technical documentation, but that led to understanding markup languages, and markup languages are how the World Wide Web got started.
Yep.
And so I stepped into doing HTML coding as one of the very, very first people that was looking at HTML as a language that could facilitate transactions and more intentional interactions between people.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately that led to the development of virtual vineyards, which became wine.com. And I mean, just as a level set, we launched virtual vineyards on January 25th, 1995.
Wow.
That was just not quite a year before Amazon, right? So the idea and the simplicity and the interaction model and the way that people move through an information space to buy, that was virtual vineyards, right? Mm-hmm. That's when people said, this is how it's done. And everybody got on board.
Wow.
So I've had the incredibly great fortune of working with some world-class companies, from Apple to DreamWorks, and I'll explain the PDI thing another point. I've got to definitely bring that back around at one point. But I've worked in startups. I've worked in mid-sized companies. I've been an operational leader, been an executive. Mostly I've, just been doing my thing. And usually a couple of years after I'm doing my thing, somebody says, oh, you're a UX person, or you're this, or you're that. I'm like, oh, okay, that sort of makes sense. But by that point, I'm already beyond it. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I am now. I'm an executive player coach. Like, have you ever heard of one of those? No, of course not. Like, what is that? Right. And that's a fractional executive who does executive coaching from within those fractional roles. Mm-hmm. And I do speaking and consulting and coaching and all that good stuff. But I just sort of stumbled into this, and it'll have a name in a few years, but I call it being an executive player coach right now.
Yeah. And it just made me think of something else too. I like to ask this, it comes up a lot. Would you say that you fell into UX? Yeah.
No doubt I fell into UX. And I've got a world-class story for that one too.
Yeah.
You tell me if you're ready
for it. Go for it. Yeah.
So I was working at this cool company called SGI, Silicon Graphics, back in the day. And I started at SGI in the technical documentation world. And I got promoted, a number of times, and ended up responsible for the technical writing team for the advanced systems division, technical writers. And one of my assignments was to rewrite the installation guide for the software, for the operating system and sort of system software that ran on the SGI box. Mm-hmm. And SGI, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, was the company that produced the hardware that enabled rendering for Jurassic Park. Like, that was really the first commercial grade CG, computer generated movie that just blew people out of the water.
Right.
And SGI was on the front end of that. And the cool thing about SGI, well, one of the many cool things about SGI, and it was just an amazing company, was that the ASD, Advanced Systems Division super servers, were binary compatible with the desktop entry level system. So it meant one installation would work on the small machine, that would work on the large machine. But that led to an installation guide that was like really long.
Wow. Yeah.
And I went to the to my management at the time, and I said, this is so convoluted that wouldn't it make sense if I just rewrote the installation guide like it should work, and then we could rewrite the software so that it would just be simpler, rather than having this convoluted, super complicated, got to wave a rubber chicken over your head and use a slide rule to get this stuff installed. And the management's like, yeah, that's a clever idea. Yeah, why don't you do that? It'll help us save paper when we ship the system. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not why I was thinking about it. But anyway, so I took this 150-page installation guide and I boiled it down to about, I don't know, I don't remember exactly, but it was like 20 pages or something.
Wow.
And then they rewrote the software so that across all of the systems, the software worked like it was supposed to, because what I told my management is if we're documenting it, it's a defect, right? If I'm having to explain it, it's not obvious.
Yep.
And so why don't we just do it like this? And then we won't need any documentation, but we'll have a little documentation just in case. And oh, by the way, it'll make it a whole lot easier and also a little less expensive because there will be less paper. Mm-hmm. It turns out that was my first UX job, right? And I didn't know it. But what I was doing was designing the user experience.
Yep.
So
and it's funny how many of those stories just abound. Somebody could just do a website with everybody's story about how they got into UX, because I tell people all the time, especially those newer to UX, there was a day that none of us decided to do UX work. You fell into it and then you fell in love with it. Yeah. And then you pitched your tent and you stayed there. And that was pretty much it. You also mentioned something else near and dear to my heart, how many times I've been in meetings. I know a lot of people are going to laugh hearing this. How many times have you been in meetings and had somebody, because there's always somebody that's not responsible for the design, trying to design, and they always want to just say, well, we can just do a help file for that. Hey, we can just do a tooltip for that. And I'm like, how about you just make it intuitive? And you don't have to explain it. If plan A is to explain how it works, then we're missing something.
Yeah.
And I wish more people would get that. But that's still in 2024, still happens a lot.
And my mantra was documentation is defect. That was my mantra everywhere I went. What are you doing? I'm rewriting the installation guide. Why are you doing that? Documentation is defect.
Yep. That's I used to sit across the aisle from the technical writers. I had one part during my career when I was doing UX part-time during the day. And they just wrote. And, job security in their mind. But I'm like, I was also back then I'm taking care of, I'm the company's webmaster for the internet and the intranet sites. And so, and then we also started a UX design group with a website design group, what it was called, because we still weren't calling it UX at that time. But I was also responsible for e-learning. And I created e-learning courses for our software that was used to help credit unions manage their operations. And the work back, that was when authorware was a thing. And a lot of people don't know, what in the world is authorware? Right. Back when authorware was a thing, we saved $50,000 off the budget just in travel expenses alone, because the salespeople previously would travel to credit unions to teach people how to use the software. But once we sent out the courses, the e-learning courses, all that traveling ended.
I didn't realize we're like brothers from different mothers, because my job previous to Silicon Graphics was as a curriculum developer. And that's what I was doing at SCO at the time. And man, you learn how to think when you're doing that. And you
Yes.
learn how other people think, and you learn how to connect how you think, how they think.
Yep. Yep. You automatically, when you do it right, you're automatically user centered.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't help but empathize. You can't, as a lot of people do today, where there's a lot of spitballing
Yep.
and there's a lot of fake it till you make it. And I had somebody ask me once, tell me about a time that you failed. This is going to sound funny to some people. They tell me
Mhm.
about a time that you failed in your design, that you did everything. They literally said you did everything that you thought was right and you found out that it was wrong. And I say, sorry if this sounds arrogant, but I never experienced that because it wasn't, not only was it like not allowed in my mind, failure was not an option. If we spend time to learn what the mental models are, we didn't use that terminology then, but if we spend time
Right.
knowing what they want, we spend time finding out what their pain points are, we spend time finding out what's important, we spend time researching things to confirm what works. How in the world do you do? I still don't understand. How can you do that and then deploy something that's an absolute failure? The only way it fails is if hubris has been interwoven in
Yeah.
some way, form, or fashion. Assumptions are being made. I know my users has become the people are waving that banner and making assumptions when they actually don't know their
Mhm.
users. It's a very bias infused type of an operation. I've interviewed for jobs and said that. And
Mhm.
I'm not going to take that back because I'd be lying if I did. We didn't fail. The only time I've ever worked on a project and failed was because a third party design company was
Mhm.
trying to get the Flash Design Award of the week, and so they ignored the recommendations, did their own thing, and it was beautiful. And I think they did get Flash Site of the Week, but it failed because
Mhm.
it didn't reflect the user needs. They took all the UX stuff and threw it out. So yeah, there's some
Yeah.
beautiful stuff. So I'm thankful for my time in that world because, as you said, it made me think. It automatically made me think, put myself in the shoes, in the seat of the people who were learning the software, and it made me work a particular way. And
Yeah.
so yeah, there was no I like this color, so therefore I shall use this color or
Exactly.
things like that. Yeah, we didn't do that.
Yep.
Wasn't a thing. So that's fantastic. So I'm going to get into some of our scripted questions. Here are some things I shared with Harry early on so he would know what we were going to talk about. Give him a chance to think about some things. And I've spent some time going through the book. I spent some time looking around the internet for things about Harry. And I came up with 5 things that I think would be great to elaborate on. And then and of course other things may come up and that's fine and dandy. So we'll handle it based on how things are come to mind. The first thing that I thought about, and you might get a chuckle out of this, but the first thing that I came across that really sort of stirred up my curiosity was I came across something that said Harry Max is an autodidact, and I'm going, yep, and there's. And I'm like, I've got to hear more about this. So can you tell me and the audience what exactly an autodidact is, and what is the value proposition associated with being an autodidact?
Oh, yeah. I love this. I mean, and there are so many great stories associated with it. I'll try to keep it short. An autodidact, the word autodidact is basically a super fancy term for dropped out of college and taught myself everything. But it goes a little further than that because I have a learning disability and I'm very dyslexic and I didn't learn
Mhm.
to read until I was most of the way through elementary school.
Wow.
And it took me a long time to learn to read. And then it took me a long time to learn to read quickly.
Mhm.
And I had a lot of catching up to do. And then I eventually got to college, and there were so many interesting things to learn about. I found it really difficult to follow one major.
Mm.
And so I kept studying things that were interesting to me. I studied psychology, I studied philosophy, I studied electronic music, I studied recording, I studied like everything I could dive into. It required a lot of reading and a lot of learning and a lot of
Mm.
asking questions. And so ultimately, when an opportunity showed up for me in my last year of college to join a team in a computer company, it was a no brainer. It was
Yeah.
like, why would I go finish my degree in this thing that doesn't make a lot of sense when I can go continue learning at warp speed? And
Hmm.
my learning has never slowed down. So an autodidact is just my wink, wink, nod, nod way of saying I'm not a dumbass. I'm really interested in all sorts of things. I've taught myself a lot of stuff, and I've had a lot of mentors and teachers over the years.
Hmm.
And man, if there's one thing, if you talk to 100 people about me, they're going to say, if you were to say to them, what's one thing about Harry that everybody knows? They'll say, he recommends a lot of books.
That's funny. That's another commonality that we have. I dropped out of
Yeah.
college in
Interesting.
the second year.
Uh-huh.
And because it's like, this doesn't make sense. And forget about all the school stuff. I mean, I graduated. I live in Detroit, in the Detroit
Uh-huh.
area. And our senior year was extended because there was a school strike.
Mhm.
When I graduated, I got my graduation gift money from family. They took my money from me and forced me to enroll in college. So it was 3 days between, I graduated in August instead of May or
Uh-huh.
June. And so 3 days later, I'm in college. So I spent a year and a half going to school, pretty much forced to go to school, didn't really have a solid interest in anything, but had some kind of an interest in a lot of things.
Yeah.
But most importantly, at that time, I'm like, I know what I want. What I'm interested in the most is a paycheck. And so I dropped out. And I know people say that, yeah, Darren is big on education, which I am.
Mhm.
But they fail to realize that when I got my first UX job, full-time UX job, I had an associate's degree. That was it.
Yep.
And so I was like you did. I dove into books. I'm known for my book recommendation list. To this day, I'm always, and I think I'm actually about to put together, for those who didn't know this, I guess I'm announcing this officially, I'm putting together a self-learning track for people who want to learn about user experience, but not go the $25,000 route of a master's degree. Going to put
Sweet.
together a formal, this is how you do it. This is what you do. And it'll be the same type of thing that I did. I immersed myself in books. So the Nathan Shedroffs and the Richard Saul Wurmans, Kelly Goto, you don't hear about her anymore.
Yeah.
Susan Weinshank. I'm going through these books and just lock myself in a room. Earl Moreau. Nobody ever talks about Earl Moreau in the book he wrote about information architecture, which actually I love Rosenfeld. I love Peter Morville. I love Jorge Rango. But Peter Moreau's book actually impacted me more
Mhm.
than the Polar Bear book. Can't live without the Polar Bear book. But Earl Moreau, he actually, not only did he inform me about or teach me about information architecture, he had some ideas about what was going to happen to the discipline. And so he got a bit prophetic in his work.
Mm.
And those types of books, those types of things helped shape me into who I am today. Now, of course, I did go back and get all these degrees, and now I'm a doctoral candidate. So yeah, we're still addicted to all that. But I'm not. I went back to school because I like education, not to learn how to do UX better. I went back
Right.
because people were slamming the door in my face because I didn't have a particular degree, and I wanted to eliminate that obstacle.
Mhm.
So I went back to school, but so for people who, I literally heard somebody say, yeah, Darren's big on education. No. You got it all wrong. I actually, that's not what happened. And I got my first master's in 2011. So everything I did earlier in my career was all done sans a master's degree.
Mhm.
So,
That's
no.
awesome. You'll be interested to know that the epilogue to my part of the story there is it's kind of a month ago now. I went to the memorial service for my favorite professor, Frank Andrews at UC Santa Cruz, and just an amazing man. And I spoke briefly there about the impact that he had on my life, because when I finished up at Virtual Vineyards, which became wine.com, that was kind of my first startup. I had a little money in the bank, and I was looking for what I was going to do next. I thought, I should go back to school and finish my degree. And I thought, well, I'm not doing that without talking to Frank Andrews, and who's the chair of the chemistry department. But he taught courses on love and
Wow.
wrote books on love. And he's like an amazing man. And the story that I told at his memorial was when I went back in August or September of, must have been August of like 1996. And I said, Frank, I finished up my startup. Here's what I did, shopping cart, all, so on and so forth. I'm thinking about going back to school and finishing up my degree. Not really sure what. I'm kind of curious about your thoughts, and maybe if I could get some advice from you about, I trust you. And he looked at me and he made this funny face and he goes, Harry, I recommend you do not go back to school. He said, school ruins people like you.
Wow. That's some sage advice.
So he's got the first credit in my book. If you look at the acknowledgments, it's Frank Andrews for his unconventional advice, because that book would not have happened without his advice.
Wow. That's amazing. And that's something that people need to know. You don't need a degree to do UX. Some companies will stop you because the way that they're structured, they demand it at a certain level. That's just something that they do. But generally speaking, no, you can thrive without a degree in UX. And many people have. Matter of fact, a lot of people that are thriving in UX have degrees and their degree is not in UX.
Yeah.
Ironically. So
yeah. And in fact, some of the most successful people in the world don't have degrees.
Yep. Matter of fact, and a lot of them just flat out dropouts.
Yeah.
It just walked away. So I always talk about the time and chance thing. Sometimes you just don't know. Right place. Not only did a lot of us early on fall into UX, but a lot of people are where they are because they were just in the right place at the right time. You can't plan it. It just happens. So I tell people all the time, just be excellent. Be the best you. Always work to be the best you. And then let all the rest of the chips fall where they may.
I love that.
Because you just don't know.
No, and you can't know.
You can't know. It's impossible.
Right. I tell people, I just work here.
Yep. You can be your best you, though.
Yeah.
That you can. So let's
in
control
every moment,
that.
It's a choice.
Yes, absolutely. We'll dive into the book a little bit. And I'm sort of jumping right away into the book because the book there's a lot of fantastic stuff here. And the one that stood out because of my passion for time management, and matter of fact, I have to do a show that's just dedicated to that because I get asked about it way too much. In chapter 8, I'm bypassing 7 chapters here because this just jumped out at me. Chapter 8 is about personal priorities. And you start off in this chapter by telling the story of a woman who's about to perform at Carnegie Hall. And I love how you just methodically just dice up the different components, the micro elements associated with how she went about approaching how to perform at Carnegie Hall. And this reminded me of, I've done master classes on EQ. I'm big on EQ and UX. And that first, all the thought leaders in EQ always stress first self-awareness, that first quality and element. And that's what this reminded me of. So can you talk to us about personal priority, what personal priority management is all about, how we can head down that path of mastery, and what benefits await people who embrace the challenge?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it's a long answer, way more than we have time for here. But let me start by saying that it's very much, it has to start with self. And in the darkest hours of the COVID pandemic, one morning, 5 a.m., Capitola, California, I was sitting on the couch in the living room. We weren't going anywhere. And I was struggling with figuring out how to make certain aspects of this discussion around personal priorities work for people so they could understand and internalize what I was trying to get across. I had this insight, and it was like, man, they joke around about how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. And I'm like, look, I'm an audiophile. I spend more on equipment than I do on the music because I'm a nerd when it comes to audio equipment. And I thought, who, what musician who do I respect who has performed at Carnegie Hall and can speak to what happens when you figured out how to get there, and now you've got to figure out how to prioritize what's important, right? And I thought, oh man, I love Rosanne Cash's music, right? And this is the daughter of Johnny Cash and Vivian Cash, and she's very accomplished musician and artist. Seth Godin calls her. He wrote me in an email because I asked him about using a quote in my book, and I didn't know Seth. I just wrote him an email, and he responded, and he said Rosanne is an artist's artist, and so I reached out to her agent, and she accepted an invitation to talk me through how to think about managing priorities in a world-class situation, right? So here it is, a couple of weeks later, we're on the Zoom call, and I'm like, how do you do it? Like, how do you think about this? Right? And she walked me through that, and that's what is in that chapter, is the essence of you have to start with yourself. So much when I look around in the world, so much of what I see wrong is that we don't start with ourselves. We start by pointing fingers. We start with accusations. We start with the fundamental attribution error. We make all sorts of judgments, but we don't often start with ourselves and figure out, where does it live in my heart?
Yep.
Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? How am I going to be my best self? Like, let's start there, and let's stop with all the proclamations about what other people need to be doing and how they needed this and they needed that, or you should do this, or let's just start with like being really deeply honest with yourself, because you don't have to be honest with other people. You can be candid with other people, but you do need to be honest with yourself.
Yep.
And if you're honest with yourself, you're in a much stronger position to make intelligent choices about what matters most, what matters least, and about how you're going to evaluate what's in between those two poles. And so she walked me through, look, this is how I do that. I start with myself. Like, yes, that seems right. And then she's like, and then I look to who I'm playing for, right?
Wow.
Metaphorically speaking.
Wow.
Right. I have an audience, right? And these people pay good money to come here, and they expect me to do the hits, right? But I've only got a certain amount of time, and there are certain things I might be working on that I really want to experiment with and share with them, right? So I've got to figure out how to balance that. And she said, but you can't just know what you want for you, and you can't just know what they want for them. You have to respect the venue. You have to respect the context of the situation that you're in. And I was like, that is perfect, because fundamentally, prioritization is about understanding the context you're in. It's about understanding the stakeholders. It's about understanding who matters, what matters to them, and how do you fit in that? And how do you do what you do to be your best in that environment, to try to close the gap between the current state as it is and a future desired state where that gap is ripe with possibility. But if you're not clear about what you want, and you don't think cogently about what other people want, and then figure out how to construct a path from where you are to where you want to be with those things in mind, why bother prioritizing on a team? Why bother going into an organization and prioritizing? Right. You've got to start with self.
Yep. Oh my God. There's so many, man, hearing that, just so many things come to mind. The first thing that came to mind as you were elaborating on that was, I just kept thinking about the classic Venn diagram between user needs, business needs. And they used to say technical constraints. And eventually I dropped the technical, because there's more than technical constraints that we have to deal with as UXers.
That's right.
That's what I kept hearing about, that the constraints of the venue. has all the constraints, the user needs, the customers the audience that's paying to come and see her perform at Carnegie. And then the business needs. What does she need to do? Because if she just looks at them, at the customers, and just looks at the venue, but doesn't think about her own needs as an artist, she's not going to hit that sweet spot. That sweet spot between those three things is something that a lot of people are coming into UX and they don't learn about. They come in and they think they're just going to learn Figma, have Figma will travel, I like to say, and they think that that's it. And they're just going to do it. No, it's all about these. I don't know if you've seen this illustration I do called the 4 pillars of UX or the landscape of UX. And somebody counted it. It has UX in the middle, and then it's just littered with techniques, methods, methodologies, deliverables. And somebody counted, they said there's 250 things in this illustration. And so the question is, how many of these things can I use to help find the sweet spot? Learn about the business needs, know what I have at my disposal as a UX practitioner, and what constraints, whether it's time, whether it's budget, whatever it is, whether it is technology, and then labor to find the sweet spot, not just come in here and just take orders and make something look pretty and then devalue the discipline, as a lot of people have a tendency to do nowadays. That's what I hear. And it's funny, there's UX in everything. And there's UX even in somebody performing at Carnegie Hall.
And the strange irony of it all is, because I was true to my heart, and I was like, I need to close the gap between this state where I need to get an answer for this question, and I need to reach out into the world to somebody who can speak to this in an area that's going to inspire me. The feedback, one of the points of feedback that I'm getting on the book is that's the chapter. That's the money chapter.
Wow. It's amazing. And UX is about becoming a master of priorities.
Yeah, that's right.
Even when sometimes there's something we want to do. I mean, I was always taught when I was coming up in UX, and I spent my first 10 years as a freelancer. I had my own business in the evening doing part-time work. I got in 1995, didn't get my first full-time UX gig until 2005. Didn't make a decision to go after it until 2002, 2003. And then now we're in this situation where I've got things, they're blowing my mind, the different things that are going on. But I learned, pick your battles. And that's about prioritization. You can't, every recommendation is not going to be put in place. And as much as we might love what we do, for those of us that do love what we do, we still don't. We own the user experience, and everybody doesn't understand that we own the user experience, but we still can't make people do what we recommend. So we have to prioritize. Right. And sometimes, okay, this battle, I think this would be best for users. I have data that proves that this would be the best way to go for users, but people simply aren't going to buy into it. And so that prioritization has to kick in at that point. And we have to, wave the white flag there or come up with some type of a compromise. We have to be good at that. Prioritization is so key. And I want to reinforce that for those who are listening to this and wondering, when you see the topic, what this has to do with UX. It has everything to do with UX, which is why I've really lately, I've started to really stress the fact that UX is actually a moniker. It's really a name that we're using to refer to this host of strategies that we engage in. UX it's not one thing.
That's right.
I have a t-shirt line now, really a merchandise line that it revolves around UX is not UI. UX is not equal to UI. And as soon as people think that UX is just this one thing, they're completely missing the mark. I was working on a project and somebody said, well, everything we're doing right now is just a facelift. And I went, no, it's not a facelift. I'm looking at task flows. I'm looking at reducing cognitive load. I'm looking at optimizing accessibility. I'm looking at making sure that we're generating and fostering brand trust and brand goodwill. You think this is a facelift? Oh, that's right. No.
Well, and to this point, I mean, a very subtle point here, but when I was designing virtual vineyards, this is 1994, I was doing that design work, right? what was key to me was the perception of security.
Wow. Yes.
I'm like, there's no such thing as actual security on the internet and the nascent World Wide Web. So this is about conveying trust and trustworthiness. It's about perception of security. You can't facelift that. It has to be built into everything.
Hi, folks. That is all the time we have for today. What a dynamite set. Thoroughly enjoying the conversation with Harry Max, but we're out of time today. So we will play the second part of this Talkin' Shop session with Harry Max next week. Until then, this is Darren Hood, the host of The World of UX, as always, wishing everyone all the best. And until next time, happy UXing, everybody.